Good afternoon there, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where it is time for another Rage video, where tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to do, once again, one of those sort of stories that, well, one of those videos I kind of wanted to allude to making several weeks or so ago, because as I'm in the process of getting back into a system of writing to have stuff, like, at least closer to being published, or even if we're only going through like the first to even second full drafts of this sort of thing, there's still a lot of work that has to be done, and there's still this sort of very very strange idea that I've had in my head, is that even if the first Violet book, which is sort of like, I really wanted to be like the sort of thing I really like, my first big break, there'll be a lot of things I want to release before then, which I sort of like would put me sort of just kind of out there, but then I want to put something together where it will put me sort of like on the map, like the sort of thing I'll be recognized for years afterwards. I'll still produce stuff, but that is the sort of thing where people are like, as far as adding something really interesting and new to the world of literacy, as it were. But one of those things, ladies and gentlemen, is that no matter if I do 3, 4, even maybe as much as 8 drafts of Violet, there are always the issues of whether or not I write it, I go over everything about what my characters are, and everything about what I want to convey in the first book. There's always the risk of, no matter how hard I try, or the amount of times maybe editors will probably look over it, there will still be some things that may indeed be overlooked, that maybe I haven't addressed, maybe I'm only alluding to for future books, or even are just straight up things were not meant to be there that convey the wrong impression. Or rather, some things were said at a sign of like something ironic. Because I'm quite good at doing that sort of thing, like unintentionally writing things that are quite, amusing. It's no word of a lie, ladies and gentlemen. But more than that, there's the case of simply trying to avoid stuff that I know fine well isn't particularly like... Listen. The reason why I wanted to do this video is because last night I watched a video by a YouTuber called Just a Robot, who also talks about Mary Sue's. He mostly talks about stuff like, I think it was like Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn from 2016 Suicide Squad. He talks about Mulan, he talks about Captain Marvel, movies I haven't seen. Well, I'm talking about like the 2019 Mulan, not the original, the one that didn't need to it was perfect on its own, and they couldn't stay away from it. So here comes sort of Mary Sue's and Chosen One's Where's the Line, and we start off with text in Comic Sans with this really nice little drawn Microsoft Paint figurine of the main character. I'm going to get, this is a guess. This is my OC, who is super powerful and popular, named Storm Beautiful, the Powerful, and she's 22 years old and has blue eyes and brown hair with red streaks and icy blue tips, and she has a heart-shaped titty window, and she has fishnets and combat boots, and she uses a garden shovel as a weapon. The lightning-shaped scar is my idea, and she has a heart-shaped birthmark. Less than 3, ooh, oh. Also, she has like 7 guys in love, we, her, and she's super good at everything. Ooh, less than 3, 3, 3, 3. It's also should be worth mentioning, ladies and gentlemen, the people actually in the thumbnail of this video, starting from left to right, from what I can remember, it's like Aang, Toru Honda, Shira, Haruhi Fujioka, Ruby, and then some other characters I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I do recognize those 5. Well, I recognize, by design. I've never actually seen anything from the Ruby series, so that might change in a while. And certainly, as we'll be going through this video, there'll be plenty of things I want to allude to towards the Violet series of books, and about why I write the things the way I do. But I'll just say before we begin properly is that my stories have as much right as exist to tell a story or a narrative as much as anything else. The way I write my stories is completely on me, because that's the way I wanted to do it. So whether or not things do come about as being unintentional, or rather just they just happen. Because sometimes I feel as if, like, when I look back on my older drafts, I always got the feeling as if they were literally just sort of things that happen. That's kind of like how it is. There isn't really so much like a chosen one in the story. It's rather just a guy gets... Well, I'll explain more later on. So, let's begin. In 3, 2, 1, and... Storm Beautiful.
I'll write to you. First things first. A character can 100% have Mary Sue energy and still be well written and interesting. I think the issue arises once the writers feel that the character can't demonstrate flaws or insecurities beyond a surface level. And
that is, like 20 seconds into this, and that's one of the biggest ones I have to, like, point out already. Yes, absolutely, that is true. Because, well, there's that, and then there's also, you run the risk of a character being super powerful and has absolutely nothing wrong with them, because that's the sort of issue that, like, someone like Sonichu would probably run into, because that's boring. If you look at a character who always wins, has absolutely nothing wrong with them, and expects everyone to love them, then that's not being particularly very realistic. In the case of the Violet series that I'm doing, Adam he's just like this basically very average 14-year-old kid. He's just going through school. He's about to start his GCSEs. He just feels as like, you know what, he's just trying to find his place in the world whilst him and his mother are constantly on the move. And then in comes this character who has this tremendous power to invade Adam's dreams, and suddenly it's like having an actual real friend in his life. But this is one that could do things that Adam didn't realize he was capable of doing before. Now you might, but the thing, it sort of just goes a little bit further than that. It's not really so much that, you know, Violet is technically like all powerful. She has very obvious flaws in the fact that there's a certain part where she kind of like has to like struggle with her mortality as to whether or not she really thinks she is doing the right thing by, not so much by the underlying motive of her as a succubus, but rather whether or not trying to help people is actually the best thing she can do because of certain things that happen later in the book. So, yes, there is the flaw about, you know, compassion, compassion, strangely enough, being a little bit of a flaw, but rather it's out of why she's showing compassion is sort of how it is. Being haunted by past events.
I believe most viewers find the perfect, overpowered, super nice protagonists to be quite boring. Guess what? They really are. People like to relate to characters and see characters reflect parts of the real world, and literally no one from the real world is perfect. The first times I saw the term Mary Sue tossed around was in the midst of my anime teen phase back in the 9th grade. Loved that. People were calling characters Mary Sues, and I finally realized why so many protagonists felt boring compared to side characters for me. There's this one type of character I can think of. He's your average guy, average height, doesn't get angry, doesn't get emotional at all, really. He's usually surrounded by a bunch of people, mostly girls, and they all have more personality than he does. But they're all obsessed with him. He's super nice, super generous, and never messes up. He can often have a random power that feels overdone or underpowered, but everyone in the show is still super obsessed with him. Sure, not all of the people who I'm thinking of are boring, and maybe there's a fun catch or something that makes the character unique, but for the most part, these are boring characters with no flaws, no personalities to build on. So why are they so popular? Mary Sue characters are made this way because their lack of specific personalities or flaws.
I was going to say more self-inserts. That's the sort of direction I was going in, is that they are very directly self-inserts for anyone to be involved with. And that is a bit of an issue I kind of had at the beginning when I was trying to write Adam, because I was just trying to write him as this teenager who's just sort of like going to school, but then really it kind of like stops there, because with the idea that him and his mother constantly move from from throughout all the southern counties of England. He's never really found a place to sort of like settle, so he sort of kind of like looks out into the world with a kind of like more of an observing kind of way. He's just trying to take things in and kind of, or he does want to get involved. He wants to be expressive, but the problem is that he's always aware that he's maybe pulled out and be on the move again, so he has to make the most of everything he has around him. So he's very collective, he's very, I'd say, more environmentally conscious, and rather he has to like do this at the view of, you know, the unpredictability of things. But now as he's like getting older and he realizes that, well, he's always obeyed his mother, so why should he continue to do that? Because at some he has to come to terms like with the fact that, you know, why has he got to like go through this? He's got to start like, you know, showing a bit more like being a bit more, you know, questioning his mother, and he's got to, because he has like these sort of things like driven out of him. And I feel like with someone who's actually willing to stand up for himself in the way that Adam does, as well as actually build off or even work around some of the things that he's been told by Violet, it gives you the impression that Adam is just still this, for the most part, like an innocent involved in all this. However, as the book progresses and he comes to terms with the fact that maybe some things actually are more in his control and he has more of a say about things than he realizes at first sight, is kind of where it's interesting. He changes because he grows up, he's going through puberty. And it's not like one of those ones in Big Mouth where it's more, you know, explicit and they show more about, you know, the more sexual and physical like manifestations people go through when experiencing puberty. Adam is sort of more on the, he's now looking out at the world and realizing it's not such an innocent place, and it's not necessarily full of innocent people. That's, I think, a bit more interesting because it shows development, that he realizes that the world is changing around him, but rather it's he who's changing. I even think there's like a part in like chapter 9 or somewhere where he says, I feel as if the world is changing around me, but is it? That's an interesting development because he's again questioning, he's wondering why things are the way they are, and he comes to understanding why the world is how it is, and whether or not the good things that are happening in his life now are actually good things at all. He wonders why there's this strange woman who calls herself the Forbidden Queen who's coming into his dreams almost every night. He wonders as to whether or not she is who she said she is. He worries about whether or not this woman is going to violate him and then basically kill him by stealing his innocence. There's also numerous instances where there are succubi who want to exactly know why there is such a stigmata, you know, against their kind from humans. There's a lot of idea of like exploration. I think like exploration is the sort of thing I want to like really, because before it was like the imaginative sort of side of things about Violet talking to Adam about the power of his dreams and what he can create if he puts his mind to it. But there's also, in the real world, there's also the sense that this is fantasy and this is reality. And the reality is that some people have to make their decisions about what they know. And as you see Adam in school, a place of learning, he learns about whether or not like certain things are like worth questioning, and sort of it's the kind of like experience I was going through in school anyway, where I would ask more and I would learn more through the more I asked. And Adam just goes through this. And that's more interesting because, again, you learn more about him as he's going through life, or he's just going through school life and puberty and all the rest of it. That's the sort of thing where I imagine Adam is more interesting, and he's not just a Gary Stu. He's, in many ways, he's becoming his own person. He stops saying yes, mom, and yes, this. He stops saying yes, teacher, or yes, mom, at something like maybe about halfway into the book, and he always just he stops using these phrases because he's changing. He stops using these phrases and becomes more of an independent person. I think there's something to be said about that, because in the first book, at least, I know I'm like really dragging this out, but I kind of like want to explain the methodology of what I've learned, and as through these drafts and these notes and these ideas, and how as I'm looking through certain videos, there are plenty of channels that do justify that perhaps the way I'm laying things out is actually not just the right way to go about it, but rather this is an interesting way of going about it, because there is no guide there is no manual to say to write a perfect fantasy novel you have to do this and this. There's more to it than just that. Anyway,
make it super easy for the viewer to project onto them, making it a self-insert
my point
source.
exactly.
The same reason that YN fan fictions and Wattpad stories were so popular at the time. And yeah, maybe this worked when some of us were 12 and thought having no personality would be ideal compared to whatever, we were actually doing at age 12, but now it just feels really dry. I don't want to watch a show where the protagonist is someone who would go into an ice cream shop and order vanilla soft serve with rainbow sprinkles and think it's a fun day. No. I want a protagonist who orders funky, chunky, mint choco dunky and gets extra fudge and then fights with their best friend who prefers peanut butter slammin' bammin' supreme. The point of a character, protagonist specifically, isn't to make them a blank slate for any viewer to project onto. Instead, they're supposed to be their own unique person who the viewer may find a trait or two to relate to, and perhaps learn a lesson from in a more abridged sense. This is why shows and movies have a plethora of characters. And yeah, I know there are other reasons why there are a lot of characters, but I'm holding on to this one. Most shows have a bunch of characters who, echoing reality, have different aspirations, fears, attitudes, even if there's overlap. This is always present, but it's clearest in cases like My Little Pony. Each pony has their own rump design, which is the official term. I watched a documentary, believe me. And this helps differentiate what character has what personality. It's the same with...
And I don't want to keep interrupting her because I feel like it's kind of rude to do this. But I just gotta go off on another little thing right here. And this is the thing about side characters that is a little bit harder to maybe I don't technically know whether or not this is something I really want to go into too much when it comes to because for me there's two types of side characters, especially in the first novel. The first is that the first is the one that's focusing on the main plot of the book. Most of these are either they're friends of Adam, some people who just very rarely talks to. Some of them are kind of one-offs in certain chapters. There are also those who are explicitly trying to go after him. There are those that... the sort of people you might run into in high school. And I don't want to say these are checking things off a list. But the thing is that I'm sort of mostly trying to relate some of my experiences when I was in high school about this sort of thing. And to be fair, there was no people when I was going through high school that were explicitly bad people, well, for the most part. But for the most part, I kind of got along with a lot of people in school because there wasn't really anything... Listen, the school I went to, it was an all-boys school. You kind of just learn to get along with people, and you very rarely, especially as you were getting older, actually had fights with people. At the same time, you just kind of, people you didn't really get along with, I just sort of just didn't really talk to them too much. Probably because we were two different people, whether or not I don't think they would have listened, or I would have tried to have acknowledged their nonsense, or the thing, that sort of thing. And that's just kind of how that was, and there's not really too much I can say or do that would change that anyway. But when it comes to because when it comes to more the fan, more because the side characters Brett and Kat and Cole who are sort of just Adam's friends, who they form this very mutual sort of group at his school. They're both nice people, and they have their own little quirks. That Brett is the very strong silent type, and Cole is the flimsy, very talkative type. And they get along really. The chemistry actually gels really well because Adam is kind of a little bit of both. He's he talks, but other times he will listen. He's quite big, but at the time, well, big as in broad shoulders, and I suppose I could, like, work out a system. Because the idea is I kind of, like, wanted to present him as, like, being a little bit bigger in the beginning, and he sort of, like, just mellows out and starts, like, losing a bit of weight here and there. Maybe I think it's just because at heart he wants to impress Violet, although there are other, like, female characters who sort of have Adam's a bit interest in Adam a little bit. It's interesting that there are characters in there were these side characters who I sort of wanted to make a little bit more, like, involved romantically, or at least want to ask Adam certain things about how they thought about, like, relationships and that sort of thing. Because I even remember having a conversation with somebody during a French class in year 10. This is, like, nearly 8 years ago, about relationships, and this guy I'd barely spoken to all the way through school, and he started asking me these questions about relationships, and he was asking me advice about this, which was very, very strange, because I didn't think he was the sort of person who would ask someone like me about that sort of thing. But I told him honestly what I thought, and he kind of like, okay, well, maybe I should try that. And it sort of went from there. I don't necessarily have, like, the sort of thing to, like, start telling people about, you know, that sort of thing. But the thing was is that it was a thing that happened, and and I sort of, like, again, thought to myself, again, these are just the sort of people that you would encounter during high school. Some people who are, you know, romantically involved in relationships. You got some people who were, like, not really that interested in that sort of thing. But when it comes to the other side characters, like the sort of people, not just the ones I interacted with, but the sort of people you would never see in school, especially, like, the fantasy sort of characters. In like the subplot of the first book, there are these two succubus characters. One is a girl who wants to actually understand why there is such this stigma of hatred between the succubi race as well as the humans. And you also have this other succubus who has made a name for herself by slaughtering, not through the means of, like, succubi, you know, reproduction, but rather just slaying and killing humans left, right, and center. And she obviously, Azul has to learn to, you know, understand that not all humans are hostile. And Azul and Jardis has to understand that the real world is not nearly as optimistic, but they are learning through each other, and they learn through their own pace, so they get a better understanding of why things are like that. And again, I think that's more interesting because they just learn, they go through it's again a very show don't tell sort of thing, although there are parts in there that sort of, like, are exposition, especially where, like, Jardis and Azul are talking to someone called Brother Justice. There's a lot of details involved, but the thing is that if my experiences at school are anything to go by in terms of, like, how I'm trying to, like, develop side characters, I just present them as how I would imagine I would present them if I was in school. The hard part about, like, the fantasy sort of characters was a little bit harder to come up with, but that's purely just to give the audience, again, a little bit more, like, they wanted to explore things about these characters, like, more of that sort of thing. Anyway, let's continue.
Ninja Turtles. Essentially, for children, writers are color-coding the personalities of the characters, and it helps differentiate them. Then in other shows, it becomes easier to pick on character differences without it being spelt out for us. So, what does this have to do with the Mary Sue trope? Well, there's nothing wrong with the protagonist having some OP energy, but once they're brought so far out of the realm of the other characters with specific flavors and faults, the specialness of the main character ends up being the very thing that makes them bland. So what do? We find a balance. Sure, your protagonist doesn't have to be a Mary Sue to be well written. In fact, it's safer to avoid that, but there are shows that provide a balance. A term I haven't used yet, but is 100% relevant, is the chosen one. This is a trope that is massively common, and that's perfectly fine. The problem, once again, arises when being the chosen one becomes the character's whole personality. Let's take Naruto. Naruto is the chosen one, and he has great amounts of power and is running on so much protagonist juice. But why is he not boring? Why is he a type of Mary Sue without crossing the line? For starters, Naruto isn't super nice and perfect. He starts off rather annoying and loud and kind of bad at being a ninja. His personality is specific, so the viewer has to find specific ways to relate to him instead of just projecting onto a clean slate. In addition to this, Naruto isn't the only special one in the series. Sasuke is stated as the most powerful in the beginning with his own tragic origin story. Then you meet Neji, who is a prodigy with his own personality as well. Then Rock Lee, who in literally any other show ever would have been the protagonist. And yes, I've seen the spin-off. Then there's Gaara and even Shikamaru. So many characters are seen as super powerful and unique. So while Naruto is the protagonist, he doesn't sit so high above the others that he feels stale. Another way a character can avoid crossing the line as a Mary Sue is to reinterpret the Chosen One trope as a whole. I recently watched The Owl House, and one line sticks out to me.
Oh, sorry.
Look, kid, everyone wants to believe they're chosen. But if we all waited around for a prophecy to make us special, we'd die waiting. And that's why you need to choose yourself.
Luz, like every other child at that age, wants to be special.
I actually, you know what? I like that one. You have to make yourself chosen, and I'm gonna work that into Violet somehow. You know what? I'm gonna try that out, because to talk about a little bit, going back into talking about Violet, I'm gonna have to talk about perhaps one of the biggest influences that I had for, because believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, Violet, the book is largely inspired by a lot of manga series. Yes, that's absolutely a fact. There's a lot of things that I've read throughout the years, mostly Japanese manga, that I've wanted to incorporate. I wanted to incorporate this, because the way I laid out or plotted out the narrative in terms of high points, low points, developmental sort of stages, they're all kind of episodic sort of chapters. It has a beginning where it da-da-da-da, and then it ends with and then it might, the next step, the next chapter might immediately follow up from this, or it will start off sort of on a bit of a red herring kind of thing, and then it will be reincorporated a little bit later. Which I think isn't necessarily bad in itself, unless of course there was something that I absolutely could not avoid. And I think that's sort of more towards the middle of the set of the second third, where obviously the narrative had to sort of it's laid out everything it needs to lay out, now it's gotta get down to business. Although to be honest, I think that's more sort of thing you should be doing at the end of the first part of the book. Yeah, that's I know what I said, more or less. Now, the thing about that is that the biggest influence, certainly from all the listen, let me just give you a bit of a rundown of just some of the manga that I have up here on these shelves. High School DxD, Kageyoru, it's the gambling one. My Hero Academia, Little Witch Academia, Nisekai, Nichijou, One Punch Man, Ouran High School Host Club, Pokemon Platinum, Ruby, Rosario Vampire, Sailor Moon, Tokyo Babylon, Ultraman, what's that, Vampire Knight, Yu-Gi-Oh! R, the Seventh Garden, I think, Blue Exorcist, Astra, Lost in Space, Attack on Titan, Absolute Boyfriend, Alice in the Country of Hearts, Blue Exorcist, Dragon Ball Z, Death Note, Deadman Wonderland, Bakuman, Black Butler, Full Metal Alchemist, Fruits Basket, Gantz, and even a Junji Ito edition of Frankenstein. Why exactly I bought the Frankenstein one is a bit because I've still got the hardback edition of Frankenstein that I did throughout my days in sixth form. But I think it's just because Junji Ito is he is an absolute star in himself. So out of those things I saw the ones I've just listed there, I've read a lot more in my day that I'm not entirely sure. I'm not too sure why don't have those up there. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Rosario Vampire is sort of the big one where I took, because Skune Arno, when you get introduced to him in the very beginning of the book, of issue 1, he's not necessarily very strong, very, powerful. He has a lot of, well, he's not always a perfect person. Sometimes he prioritizes his own enjoyments over others, probably because he's in a scenario where he realizes if he's outed as a human, he'll be executed. But there were other things in place where I sort of looked at Skune and thought to myself, the reason why he's so different from when he first started off to when, because without wanting to reveal too much, by the end of Rosario Vampire Season 2, Skune becomes somebody who's lost basically the love of his life, but he's on the way. He's become someone who's had to frequently defend his friends who are now vulnerable and weak. He's someone who's had to quickly learn the fact that if he's going to have what it takes, he's got to change for the better, because he doesn't seem to have because he only just realizes how much people are willing to stick their necks out on the line for him, and how he has to just be there for the people that have been there for him as well. Now, technically, Adam Lucy doesn't technically go through those sort of things, but I think he just goes through this. He was in that sort of position I was at a young age, where I sort of didn't really have any clue about what the future was going to hold for me. So part of the reason of the sequences where Adam would get visited, where Violet would visit Adam in his dreams, is that she was sort of there to show Adam all the wonderful and great things he can do with his life, and just the power of his own mind. So it's about showing exactly what you have got to offer. You're not, limited exactly by, what you can't do. You're only limited by what you think you cannot do. And it's that sort of thing is what, again, starts Adam beginning to show a bit more independence in school. It's what gets him to start realizing that he's got to crack the whip. He's taking this advice on board because he's so head over heels for Violet, because she's a great influence on Adam. Unless, of course, you could say that Adam is too easily influenced on someone as beautiful as Violet, showing great pity on Adam. And it sort of goes from there, and the idea is that it's not so much a chosen one, but rather Adam has just won a lottery he didn't realize he was playing, and Violet, or you could even go the other direction and say that Violet just on a whim decided to visit Adam, irrespective of the consequences that would follow.
Wants to be the chosen one. In a way, she kind of is. She's the only human in this magical realm, but the show makes it clear that this happens by chance, being at the right place at the right time, and it's not some long-awaited destiny. Luz wants to feel special on a higher level, though, but Ida lets her know that everyone is the protagonist of their own story and has to forge their own path. And this is what happened, essentially. Luz is supposed to go back home, but makes the decision to stay, even if she's not meant to. She's created the position herself in which she is the only human in this world. It's not destiny, and they make that clear with how she struggles to pick up the magic. I think this was an important detail to add, because if Luz was the chosen one, I'd find her a lot more boring. She's super nice and hardworking already, so we needed her to have to fight hard to make a place in this world. If not, everything would have come easy to her, and the show would have nothing to push her towards. So this raises the question, are all chosen ones Mary Sue's? I don't think so, but I do...
Well, again, that's not... Yeah, I would say probably not. The only other example I can really think about this, just to keep this part short, is... I think there was this anime I remember called Welcome to Demon School. I watched just clips of it, and it just seemed to be one where there wasn't anything dramatic, chosen, or there wasn't any prophecy on that. It was just a kid who was given... It was a bit like Hayato, the combat butler. Somebody who was just chosen to be in this new world because the real world had nothing to offer this poor guy, and he seems to just enjoy... that's... If I actually had two minds about it, I'd probably just make a book about something like Welcome to Demon School. Because Demon School is a lot more light-hearted, it's a bit more, less dramatic. But then again, at the same time, I kind of like wanted to do a bit of like fantasy and that sort of thing, because if I want to just write something that's like light-hearted and didn't really have too much of like, you know, a plot or a story, then again, that's perfectly fine as it is. But rather, in other mediums, that would be completely different compared to the sort of thing it's not really the sort of thing I wanted to write about. For example, well, I'll probably not, like, you know.
I do think there's a huge overlap because, like I said, many writers are afraid of giving flaws and individuality to their characters who are meant to be special, which completely defeats the point. Guess what time it is? It's time for me to bring up Shira into literally any conversation ever. So unlike me. Okay, confession. I did not like Adora in the first 2 episodes because I'm so wary of the Chosen Ones. I remember the line that really did it to me.
What's written on this door? It looks like some kind of password.
You can read that?
You can't?
Yeah, this kind of mindset gets old. The whole, I'm special? I had no idea. It's that thing where the protagonist's whole personality is being the chosen one. I immediately changed my mind about her when I saw them in Thamor because you get to see her personality. That's why I think it's okay. Adora has flaws, has quirks, has her own story. Her being the chosen one is just something that's part of it. In fact, the show does a great job in creating a connection between Adora's personal story and the...
I know another little thing I can like just, again, for like what this point is worth, I will just mention this. For anyone familiar with the Hyperdimension Neptunia series, some people are aware that some of the goddesses just straight up just get their powers almost on a whim. I even remember in the 3rd game where Plutia is... One second. Okay, I'm back. So anyway, where was I? There's a part where Plutia is just sitting beside a river. She's having a picnic, and then all of a sudden she just picks up this CPU, like, core, I think they called it. Ate it, thinking that it was like a rice ball, and I've got to shut the window again. She picks up what she thinks is a rice ball, eats it, and basically and immediately inherits the powers of CPU Iris Heart. And that's a good way of getting around the idea that these characters are just chosen. No, some of them just so happen to be in the right place at the right time. That's how sometimes I think I kind of sort of wanted to try and do it in my stories. I don't really want to say, like, because there is a little bit of like a backstory as to why Violet decided to choose to visit Adam in the first place. Because it's not technically random, but rather there is sort of a reason why. And then I'm not going to necessarily explain it here, but rather I'll come back to it later. Or maybe I'll explain it in the book, or in the sequel to the book.
Concept of her being the chosen one. Her personal story is that she was on the side of evil without knowing. Shadow Weaver's emotional manipulation has led her to believe that if she's not of use to people around her, then she has no worth. This is a dangerous sentiment that stays with Adora throughout all 5 seasons. You see Adora thrive on being the chosen one. The show even pokes fun at it, with Glimmer trying to activate the sword and then Catra dragging on Adora for being special. But there are darker tones to this as well. Adora loves being She-Ra because this has made her an indispensable part of the rebellion. She feels useful, which is exactly what Shadow Weaver has told her she needs to be. That's why, when she breaks the sword at the end of Season 4, Adora is met with a lot of internal grief. She hates not having a destiny, hates not feeling useful, and she conveys this in her weird 3 a.m. dream sequences. This is where her friends step in, and assure her that they like her as Adora, not just She-Ra. I love this detail because it connects one of Adora's main character traits with the fact that she's the chosen one. Her being She-Ra doesn't feel like an afterthought, which, I know it's a reboot, so I appreciate even more how deeply they delved into this. So yeah, they thought about this since episode 1, but do all shows think about it since episode 1? I think Ruby, from Ruby, was a bit of a Mary Sue towards the start of the series, but let me explain first. Ruby is about as far as a Mary Sue can get before they cross the line into, oh, this isn't good anymore territory. I think she's safe, and has been slowly walking away from the line in recent seasons, but it's definitely close. The problem here is that Ruby has always been the special one. Yes, the other characters have their own backgrounds and stories, but Ruby, in terms of power, is so far above them with her special eyes, special semblance, special admission into the school 2 years early, special leader of the team, special connection with Ozpin, special. What stops her from crossing the line? I genuinely believe in the first 3 seasons it's Pyrrha. Despite the two of them not having much of a relationship, Pyrrha demonstrates that she is the most powerful student at Beacon, and is also very friendly and has faults. She's the one they choose to be the new maiden. Her death is what makes Ruby snap out of the Mary Sue bubble and realize, oh wow, my perky personality won't save me from Cinder's fists. Besides that, Pyrrha also is that person, like I said, that makes sure Ruby isn't so far above the other characters. I realize I sound like I'm dragging Ruby as a character, and I'm really trying not to, because I love Ruby, and I think this is largely due to the fact that they snuck in some flaws. If they gave Ruby Pyrrha's personality and ran with it, I'd be bored. But they made Ruby act childish, have issues with working as part of a team, lack in hand-to-hand combat, and be a bit too idealistic. Sure, her constant speeches can still get old, and she has the "I'm special" lines, but as the series progressed, they didn't wrap the focus so much around Ruby. Other characters had more development.
I think, like, one of my, I'm sorry, I think one of my absolute favourite lines in all of media, ladies and gentlemen, is the... You remember, like, in, like, the last part of the episode where Homer Simpson grows his hair back, and then Carl says to Homer, as just before he's about to give a presentation, it wasn't about, you know, the fish sticks. It wasn't about, you know, being in the executive washroom. It wasn't about the hair. It was all about you, Homer. It was all about what you did, and it was all about what you brought to the table. And I feel, again, it's like one of those things where I want to have a character say to Adam, right at the part where Adam feels as if, like, I'm about to say something really important. Because, okay, let me explain, like, the scene what I'm trying to describe. Adam is is like having a dream where he's in an assembly hall, and he's about to sit down, and he's about to address everyone because he's just about to receive a reward. Then all of a sudden, Violet comes onto the stage and addresses Adam. Oh, and Adam alone. Violet talks to Adam about, why do you think you're here? And Adam has to sort of like explain exactly just how he got here in the first place, because he's supposed to go to an award ceremony later that day. And then Violet starts asking, and she just wants to know exactly why Adam thinks he's justified, or why. Then Adam, like, just, again, showing his development, he starts asking Violet, why on earth do I have to, like, justify myself? Because I worked hard and I did all that, and I'm grateful for that. It's sort of like a little bit of a back and forth, and it's really one of the first times that Violet has, like, become quite confrontational with Adam about stuff like this, because she's sort of not entirely sure how she's supposed to, like, take the information that Adam's telling about how it got here in the first place. Of course, Adam has to explain that, he is grateful for exactly what's happened, but he's not technically sure whether or not this is technically if it was all meant to be, or how, or whether or not, or what was the reason behind it, because Adam, at certain points of the book, he starts to wonder just as to what exactly Violet sort of really wanted, because of the nature of the succubi, and there's a lot of interesting, well, in my opinion, they're interesting because you kind of wonder exactly. The thing about Violet is that it's the sort of thing it keeps you guessing as to whether or not she's saying these things because they are what both Adam wants and needs to hear, or whether or not this is just an elaborate ruse to get around the fact that Violet is slowly but surely playing into Adam's mind so much that he will submit to her every whim. This is despite the fact that Violet could have just done this from the very beginning. But she didn't because she doesn't want to, because she's not that sort of person. Which is very suspect, especially as to what actually happens at the end of the first book, and you find out sort of just what Violet is capable of. So, there's that.
and get ready for some controversial opinions. I think Season 4 was really important with this. In Season 4, each of the girls was the protagonist of their own story, having been separated after the Season 3 finale. This helps solidify that the show is about 4 girls, not 1, and it makes the moments that do focus on Ruby in later seasons feel less Mary Sue-ish, and more like a shining moment for her. Ruby has Mary Sue energy, but she doesn't yet cross that line because of the precautions that the writers take. Most protagonists are chosen ones, to a certain degree, but how they get to this point and how they react can save them from being Mary Sues. Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender is a great example of a show taking many precautions and ensuring the line is not crossed. Like Naruto, Aang is met with multiple people who are more powerful than he is. There are other people in the show who are special for different reasons. Heck, most characters in the show are special. Inventing metal bending, being a bloodbender, banished prince. Yeah.
And Sokka.
Like in the Owl House, Aang has to forge his own path as an avatar, not fitting into a destiny so much as making it his own. Like in She-Ra, Aang is self-aware of being the chosen one, but in his case, he doesn't want to assume this identity. Like in Ruby, Aang is aware that while he has great powers, he is not immune to failure. Okay, we're about to enter some niche territory. Have you ever heard of Blue Spring Ride? It was one of my favorite anime/manga when I was in high school because, despite one really, really bad scene, it subverted most tropes and focused on friendship above romance while still being a simple shoujo. The main character, Futaba, falls into a slot that, in a lot of shoujo, would leave her with this overly desired, too perfect, super sweet, loved by all, never does anything wrong position. However, Futaba, out of almost any high school animation I've ever seen, is the most normal high schooler. What I mean by this is she is the least special person out there. She gets medium grades, has an average amount of friends, makes mistakes, owns up to them. She can come across as rude, but has good intentions. It's clear from the start that she'll end up with Ko, but he genuinely isn't into her from the start. When I said that in Ruby it's a show about 4 girls, not 1, I think this anime has the same idea. This isn't just a romance story, it's a story about the friendship between 5 teenagers, all with unique personalities. Futaba doesn't waltz around with every other character having unrequited feelings towards her. Sure, throughout the 40-something chapters, 2 dudes do end up liking Futaba. Ko, clearly endgame, and then this guitar man's. But they don't fall for Futaba as one does with Mary Sue's, upon first sight and without much reason. Both actually dislike her at first because she has this thing where she accidentally offends people upon first meeting them, which is super relatable. The romance story doesn't rely on the perfect nature of the protagonist or the Mary Sue love-at-first-sight occurrences that many high school romances do. Instead, the writer worked on developing the friendships and relationships over time, which makes Futaba much more relatable than the perfect, overly kind, bland protagonists that many other stories have. I know my first time hearing the term Mary Sue came from discourse surrounding Ouran High School Host Club. This isn't really a fair jab for me to make because the whole show is satire regarding shoujo itself, and Haruhi is a Mary Sue, which, yeah, is the literal point. But shows that do this in a non-ironic manner are usually ones I can't sit through. One thing I haven't watched in years, so please take this with a grain of salt, is Fruits Basket. I
Oh
remember
boy.
caring so little about Toru, who wakes up and gives the old, I miss my dead mom, but I don't need to process the emotions because having to process emotions would make me less perfect to the eyes of the viewer speech. Boo. Instead, she's happy literally all of the time. And once again, I don't remember, but I'm taking the guess that at least 2 dudes were probably in love with her. Which, okay, that's fine, but her personality is so... I need flaws. Writers need to realize that having a character trip once in a while and be like, I'm so clumsy, isn't a character flaw. That's a cheap way out. Okay. Now that I'm done bullying the mega successful and well thought out anime from my parents' basement, I think that's enough. In conclusion, there's a difference between a character being special or powerful or the chosen one, and then them being a Mary Sue. The writer just needs to understand how effortless a Mary Sue's spot in the universe seems, and find ways to subvert it. If the way they're special relates to their own character flaws and shortcomings, that's even better.
Okay, you know what? That's I'm gonna just click that off there, and I like that because at the very least, one of the things that, again, coming into videos like this is that it gives me a little bit more to think about in terms of exactly, just as to want to know exactly how I should and how I should not be able to do things. Because you know what the biggest thing I've kind of had an issue with in terms of okay, let me see if I could just put it like this. I know this video is quite long already, but let's see if I could just say one more thing that I could just straight up put out there. When it comes to because really Adam is kind of is technically the chosen because he is the main character. I remember what I said about being influenced by anime and manga, and now I'm saying it's calling him the main character, the protagonist, which is kind of exactly that. But I suppose, in the way of Toru Honda, Toru is just trying to be as optimistic as I think she could possibly be, because the scenario of someone living in a tent in the middle of the forest and having no parents, that's obviously a tough. The situation is tough, obviously, and it's more just on the kindness of most of the members of the Soma family to rely on. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, let me just see if I could go on to a slightly. Let's change the subject around exactly. Why exactly did I want to make Adam the main character as opposed to, let's say, Violet? Because you might argue that Violet is the one who is the powerful being in all this. She is the forbidden queen. She is the person who has the highest authority and power among all the succubi race of her particular village of Sangria. Well, it's more of a kingdom, queendom, I suppose. She's the one who has all the power. She's the one who can decide what she does and what she wants to do. So why technically isn't the book technically about Violet as opposed to this average high schooler? So why exactly is that? Is it because I think it's slightly more interesting to see how Adam is sort of both in two worlds at the same time. He's in the world that exists in his own mind, his own reality, and he also exists in reality of just going to school and just trying to know exactly what he really wants out of life. But actually, technically, you don't even really do that in school. You just go to school to just get grades and to suddenly decide exactly if you're going to do well when you go to college or university. Some people do say that you learn a lot more fine well through high school and all that, because I did as well. This is true. But I suppose at the end of the day, I'll just say this, because I know this video's been long enough already. If I do want to say that Adam is the chosen one, it's only because the things that happen in the book sort of happen to him, and there are things that do happen to other people in the story, so we're not just following Adam in all this. So he is chosen only because he's sort of the main focus, but there are other things as well. Second, the reason why he's not really a Mary Sue is because he has things about him because of his situation that make him unique. There are things about him that make him skeptical to other things. The way that he's now sort of become a little bit more stable in his environment, he decides he wants to go even further and try new things, some of which go well and some things that don't. Adam is not a perfect Nobody in the Violet book or even the sequels are perfect. Pretty much almost all the succubi characters are basically pieces of shit that will go so far as to murder babies for the sake of thinking that they are able to, have enough to produce offspring of their own with these succubi who will do whatever they want. There were also scenes in which succubi will turn on each other. There were also ones where succubi will literally take the obviously the mentally challenged member of their group and force her to do the most horrific things, like being involved in gangbang scenarios and being raped every which way, just so that the other succubi can take advantage and rob people, kill people, do whatever they can for their own ends, because they see her not as damaged goods, but rather destroyed, and nobody would accept it, so we may as well use it. There were also characters, human characters, who exhibit very sincere and very, very strong sentiments of prejudice and racism towards other people. I say sincere because that is how they portray it. I would write characters who say things with utter sincerity, that they really do hate people who are of different origin, because I don't want to just have characters say that they hate other people because of this, that, and the other. I want people to understand that they mean this. I don't want them to just think that this is just your conventional person who's obviously supposed to be like the antagonist. I don't want them to just see him like that. I want to see that they mean every word of it. But at the same time, people like that exist in the real world anyway. So, call that what you will, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, because we're almost knocking on the 1 hour mark, the line in Violet is that nobody is better really than anyone else. The only exception you could say to that is because since we're following Adam, you could say that he's more like, neutral good, and everyone else is sort of like all over the place. Like Violet is like chaotically neutral, and other characters are like all over the place. You can almost say that Adam is just sort of like at the slap bang in the center, but again, that could be susceptible to change depending of like there's a way of like doing characters and all that. So anyway, there's probably bound to be like more videos to explain my methodology about how I go about the writing process and how I elaborate my characters and all that. So I hope people will be able to look forward to that in the coming weeks and probably even days for that matter. So I will hope to all of you guys again in the next video. Take care and bye bye for now.